And I want to show you another side of the prophet tonight. That you are God's catalyst to social transformation. And I want to give you 4 things that the Lord's given me over the last year. You might want to write these down. The first one I already said, that he wants to raise up prophets who are cultural architects and leaders who shape culture, inspire collective reasoning that helps to create healthy, happy, safe, and prosperous communities for the generations to come. I want to read it one more time. Cultural architects, what are they? Probably much more than this, but leaders who shape culture and inspire collective reasoning. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. That help to create healthy, happy, safe, and prosperous communities for the generations to come. The second one the Lord gave me is prophetic solutionaries. In my mind, this is Daniel. Prophetic solutionaries. Prophetic people who bring wisdom, knowledge, experience, and skill to bear on pressing and entrenched challenges in an effort to create positive change in our communities. I believe that one of the most profound things that's going to happen in the next 5 years is that prophets are going to be asked to come into the highest places in the land. And that they are going to, and the Lord is going to use them to solve difficult and almost impossible problems. I think that God is raising up prophetic solutionaries. And let me tell you, I'll tell you some stories that's maybe tonight, but definitely this week. One of the things I've noticed is oftentimes we get invited into these places and the person is articulating the challenge or the problem, and you're thinking, I have no idea. I have no clue. And sometimes I even find myself becoming anxious, like I got invited to this place because this person thinks I can solve their problem. They're describing the problem, and as they're describing the problem, all I feel is anxiety. I don't feel like any wisdom flowing. And I can't even tell you how many times in the last year I've been in those situations, and I have one little phrase in my mind, or maybe it's one word, and I have nothing else. And I'm like, all right, well, let's go with this. And I open my mouth, and I say whatever the phrase is, like, which is not connected to anything else. Like, I don't even know how it fits the problem. And I say, da-da-da. And then as I say it, I get another piece and another piece and another piece. And pretty soon I walk out of there, I'm like, I am brilliant. But I actually think that the Lord sometimes leaves us empty-minded in the midst of the challenge being articulated because he wants to remind us, you didn't come in here with the answer. You came in here with the answer. Do you know what I mean? You didn't come here with the solution. You came in here with the solutioner. That didn't go well, but that would definitely be an edit in a book. Number 3, futurists. Futurists, prophetic visionaries who with divine foresight and inspired insights peer into the future as it was meant to be, to direct society towards their noble purpose and timeless promise. Let me read it again. Futurists, who are they? Prophetic visionaries who with divine foresight and inspired insights peer into the future as it was meant to be, to direct society towards its noble purpose and timeless promise. Basically, futurists are people who can see into the future. Because they can see into the future, they can, if you will, skate to where the puck's going to be, I think is what they say in hockey. Like, you know, the puck's there, you're skating. How many of you know, maybe this will offend some of you, but if you've ever duck hunted, if you shoot where the ducks are, you aren't going to get any ducks. You know how I know that? I never get any ducks. But you have to know, my wife's the hunter. Last year, she went hunting, and I bought her a gun, she went hunting. I'm sorry if you're offended by that. You know, if you eat vegetables, I'm like, lots of rabbits died, so you could have a vegetable. If you don't understand that, it's because you live in this city too far from a garden to understand who dies so you can eat carrots. But my wife only took 3 shots and killed 3 animals. So she's a killer. So if someone breaks into our house, I wake her. I'm like, hey, baby, you might want to check that out. She also is the fisherwoman in our family. I bought her a bass boat. I think on their maiden voyage, they caught 57 fish. And the next week, they caught 212. Oh, yeah. She's awesome. What do you do? Clean house. Something like that. On a serious note, I don't even know how did I even come into any of that futurist. How did that relate at all? Oh man, I need to know the future. Oh yes. People, a futurist is somebody who actually sees the future before it happens and creates a journey towards that future. And I think that that God really wants to take prophets and create a futurist mantle on them, again, for solving hard problems. And the last one, and this probably isn't going to make too much sense until I teach on it at some point this week, but Kairos conductors. Prophets who know the times and what the appropriate action, and attitude is in the times. And I believe, and this is going to take a lot longer to unfold at some point, but you know, there's chronos. The Greeks have two words for time. One is chronos. It's where we get our word chronology, as in calendar, clock. And the other is kairos. And chronos is what we typically live in. We live in chronos times. Our life is on a clock and a calendar. Kind of funny that we have, in the 20th and 21st century, we have broken time down into seconds and minutes, right? So now we have, like, I don't know if the clock serves us or we serve the clock, but now you can do the right thing and you can have the right heart, but you can just be late. You're late. You're always late. And so we serve this clock. And but there's this other word, chronos, and chronos is what happens when divine favor meets divine opportunity. It's expressed all through the Bible. For instance, in the book of Nehemiah, it's a beautiful picture. The walls of Jerusalem were torn down for 114 years. They tried to rebuild them for 72 years. And what they couldn't do in 72 years, Nehemiah did in 52 days. And you know what's interesting? He did it with the same people they tried to rebuild it with for 72 years. What I'm getting at is he didn't bring a different crew in. He used the same crew, and how many know he stepped in to a kairos moment. And one of the symptoms of kairos moments is that things that took a long time suddenly happen. Like they suddenly happen. Like things suddenly happen. And I want to tell you that I prophesied a couple of years ago that we're actually in a kairos moment where things that took a long time suddenly happen. That divine favor meets divine opportunity. Maybe you should take that word for yourself. Maybe you've been here, maybe you're here and you're sick and you're like, I've been sick for 15 years. I've actually just learned to live with it. And you're like, I'm living in chronos times. I am living in the cycle of life. And then all of a sudden you step into this vortex of kairos time, and things that you didn't even believe for suddenly happen. Maybe your body's suddenly healed. Maybe your son and daughter is suddenly delivered. Maybe they're suddenly come out of their mental illness, or they suddenly come off their drug addiction, or maybe you haven't seen them. I feel like there's two people in here. You haven't seen your children for years. Like you don't even know if they're alive, and you're like, you've given yourself to prayer. It's like, Lord, they're yours, and I don't even know what to do with that, and they're gonna suddenly call you. And when they call you, you're going to say, that crazy prophet, he was right. I should get his book. But on a serious note, they're going to suddenly call you, and you're going to realize not just that they connected with you, but they connected you because you're in a vortex of God's favor and his divine power. And so I believe that God wants to raise up kairos conductors. You know what? I'm using the word conductor as in a music conductor. You know, the conductor doesn't necessarily play an instrument. At least they don't need to play an instrument. They definitely don't play an instrument in their conductor position. They don't play an instrument, and maybe they can't even sing, but what they do is they actually understand the music, what song needs to be played, what key it needs to be in, and who needs to play next. And how many of you know, everyone just blowing their trumpet, just playing their instrument, how many of you know that's not music. That's sound. And music is sound that's conducted for beauty. And what I'm getting at is that life is often a whole bunch of sound. Everybody's playing their trumpet, playing their instrument, wrong key, different songs, and somebody steps in and goes, whoa, 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 silence. Okay, everybody in this key. This is the song we're playing. Ready? We're going to start with the strings. And suddenly, somebody takes charge of the times and starts to be the conductor in the room. And how many of you know that you may resent the conductor at first, but when you see the beauty of the sound, let me say it this way, when you see the beauty of the music that was once just a non-collaboration of noise, become a beautiful symphony. Are you with me? A beautiful symphony. In fact, the word agreement comes from the word symphonia. It means to make a symphony. Somebody steps in and says, let's come to an agreement. I love this word in the book of Acts. It says, and having come to one mind. This is that same sense of symphony, agreement. And I believe that God is raising up people who have extreme favor. What does it take to be a conductor in this age? Extreme favor. A whole bunch of people have to all like you. Right? I love when Lance Wallnau says about favor. He said, favor makes people want to agree with you. When you have favor on your life, people actually want to agree with you. It takes that kind of favor to be a Kairos conductor. That everybody wants to play the song you think is supposed to be played, in the key you think it should be played in. And I believe that God's raising these Kairos conductors up. The Lord's taking our understanding of the prophets to another level. I see him activating prophetic people and awakening his church to become world changers. He is deploying us to bring solutions to the world's greatest problems. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us as prophets and prophetesses to engage culture at this deepest point of need. We must get off the bench and get in the game. Let me say that again. Like, here's this thing that's burning in me for a year. We got to get the prophets off the bench and into the freaking game. I don't know what to do. Well, you're not gonna know on the bench. I understand that a lot of us don't get off the bench because we don't actually know what to do. And I would say something. Banning Leipzig preached a great message. It was really simple. He said the difference between people who do something and the people who don't is the people who do something do something. And his point is that the difference between great people and not great people are just the people who great people just do something. Well, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing? Well, if you're doing the wrong thing, it'll be wrong, and then you'll know what to not do so you can do the right thing. Very seldom do you know the whole story sitting on the bench. I got a lot more to say. Moreover, it's paramount that we know the history of this significant office, the office of the prophet, so we understand the depths and the impact of our calling. This thing is really on me this morning. I was laying on my face, and I was just thinking about this morning about this evening, and I started to see something that's so simple. You probably have seen it before. I just don't know why I did it. And I began to recall to my mind all the prophets I could name in the Bible. And I can name a lot of them, but I don't know all of their stories. But, we all have a few favorites. And I started thinking about the prophets, and I named in my mind, 20 or 30 in my mind. And then I felt like the Lord said, what do they all have in common? They all have in common. And I was like, gosh, I hope this isn't like some kind of quiz to get into heaven. Nah, door opens up, you're in hell. I'm like, what do they all have in common? And I know when I tell you what I learned, you're going to say, well, of course. I couldn't think of one prophet who wasn't involved in molding culture? I couldn't think of one. Like I was thinking about Abraham. In Genesis 20, verse 7, God encounters this king named Abimelech, and he has Abraham's wife because Abraham lied. And God says to Abimelech, you better give his wife back, I'm going to kill you. And he goes, hey, whoa, back up the train, not my fault. He said it was his sister. And God says, well, you better give him back. And verse 7 says, because he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and I will heal you. And really interesting, he does give, you probably know this, he gives Sarah back, of course, but Abraham prays for him, and God opens the wombs of his wife, who had been closed, Abimelech's wife. But my point is that Abraham is a father of nations. He is the foundation of many, a father of many nations. He's a businessman. He's all these things. But one thing that he definitely is a cultural catalyst, and he's a prophet. I'm going to just share a few of these with you. Moses, of course, is a prophet. In fact, Deuteronomy 34 says that there was no prophet like Moses in Israel. We know that Moses was the leader of a country, the founder of a nation in a sense. Brought the children of Israel, not founder, but brought the children of Israel out of Egypt and into the promised land and became a leader. I love this too. I want to say this. I was talking to somebody who got saved recently, an older guy, and I was telling him, you know, you may think that your past has nothing to do with your future, like before you knew the Lord, that all of that's kind of like, it's all washed away, your sin, of course. But I'd like to propose that what you were doing before you knew Christ, which he was a business guy, actually is preparing you for what you're called to do. And I was telling him about the story of Moses, that Moses is in Pharaoh's house for 40 years. Why does God put Moses in Pharaoh's house? I'd propose because he's going to be the leader of a nation, and he was raised as a slave. How's he going to know how to lead, right? His mom and dad are slaves. How is he going to know how to lead a nation if he's never had any instruction? Well, God puts him in the house of the most powerful nation in the world, and I'd propose that he learned from Pharaoh, a godless man, how to lead a nation. Now, there are probably a lot of stuff he had to unlearn, but the point is that if you've never led anything before, and of course he was put there as an infant, but the point is, if none of your family has ever done anything but slavery, probably you got some really good teaching in Pharaoh's house. And that's before he knew God, right? He meets God 40 years later, 80 years old, and God says, you're going to lead this nation, da-da-da. He becomes the leader of a nation, but how many know that his BC experience was actually training him for his after-death experience with God, right? His resurrection encounter with God, the burning bush. And so, but my point is that Moses is called a prophet. David is a king. But in Acts chapter 2, verse 30, it says, so because he was a prophet, he knew that God had sworn to him an oath to his seat of his descendants. God swore to David that his descendants would sit on his throne forever. But it says, and being a prophet, David knew. I'm like, oh, I thought David was a king. But how many know he wasn't just a king? He was a prophet and a king. My point is that prophets were the people who engaged culture. Prophets were leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Prophets were fathers to nations. Prophets were kings. And of course, there was Nathan and Gad in the days of David who were actually giving the senior prophet, the king, information about leading the kingdom. There was Ezra the prophet who helped direct kings. There was Isaiah the prophet who helped direct kings. There was Daniel the prophet who ministered and directed 4 kings. There was Jeremiah, also directed kings. Ezekiel, Elijah, Elisha, Hosea, Haggai, Malachi. These all have one thing in common. I couldn't find the name of anyone, and I'm sure there are some, by the way, but I couldn't find the name of any prophet who wasn't actually molding culture. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Think about it. Who were the cultural catalysts in the Old Covenant? They were all prophets. Even the kings who were molding culture in God were prophets. I'm trying to say, if society has moral issues, maybe it's because the prophets are staying in the church and they haven't engaged with their cultural commitment. I'm saying, is it possible that morality is going to hell because the prophets only equip the saints and they're not engaging culture as they did for 4,000 years in the Old Covenant? I'm saying, if you're called to be a prophet, your prophetic history is fathers and mothers who engage culture and change the mindsets of nations. I'm glad that people do, but I believe that it's a prophetic call on the life of every prophet that you don't just train and equip people, that you engage culture and you shift the mindsets of nations. With the history of the prophets in mind, it seems obvious to me that God has given his prophets the responsibility of awakening the church to her glorious call and provoking the people of God to action. We must be activists, especially when it comes to morality. Immorality is dominating almost every sphere of culture. Is it possible that the responsibility of the moral condition of society rests directly on the shoulders of the prophets? As we have forgotten our mandate, abandoned our mission, and allowed the devil to intimidate us into silence? I'm asking you as a question. This isn't the normal way we open the school of the prophets. But I think it's good. I think that we should all leave here thinking, wow, all the prophets who went before us, they all shifted culture. How about us? Think about this. Isaiah 61. This is the mandate the Lord gave me the year I got saved. I didn't know much of the Bible, and someone gave me this as a prophecy, and I didn't even know where to find it. You know, those years when you have to look it up in the table of contents to find the book you want. And I read this, and I'm like, wow, this is meaningful to me. And over the years, it's become my mandate. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to preach the good news to the afflicted. He's called me to bind up the brokenhearted, to speak the release to captives, and freedom to prisoners, the favorable year of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God, to grant all those who mourn in Zion, give them a garland instead of ashes, a mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting or heaviness, that they might be called oaks of righteousness, that he may be glorified. Here's the next verse. Then they shall return. They shall rebuild. I'm sorry, let me read it to this last part to get it right. Then they shall rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations and repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Who are they? And then they shall rebuild the ancient ruins. Who are they? They are the people who are being described as broken, mentally ill, weak, depressed, discouraged. Those people, when they get the Spirit of the Lord on them and they get well, once they get happy and healthy, God goes, now go back into your city and help rebuild your cities. I don't think you can be a Christian in the 21st century and not be involved in the culture of your city. Okay. I've told the story many times. But many years ago, the year after I got married, I had a nervous breakdown. Last 3.5 years, I got very demonized and I got delivered. So that's that story in a nutshell. I wrote a whole book about it. Hey, if you have something go wrong in your life and it's really bad, write a book about it. Much better to be rich and miserable than poor and miserable, because at least you can go shopping. You know what I'm saying? So I was at the end of my nervous breakdown. I had come out of my nervous breakdown. I was probably out maybe a year, still not having panic and anxiety attacks anymore, not having insomnia, but really, really rebuilding my soul. Some of you would know what I mean. Like very low confidence, still trying to kind of figure out what day it is, still learning to like myself. All of those things were still very present. So I would say I was still broken, but I was not like mentally ill or anything like that. And so we had a business, and I would come home every night after work, and we kind of had that. We kind of had some rhythm that we built together, Kathy and I, and at the time 3 kids. And I would come home, and the kids were like, "Daddy, Daddy," Of course, you've worked a 10-hour day, and it's like, I'm having panic attacks again, And so we kind of worked out this deal with Bill Johnson helping us, that I would come home, I would greet all the family, love on the kids, and then I'd get to go take a bath in my clawfoot bathtub for an hour while Kathy cooked dinner, and that would be my, kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Kind of like decompress, detox, get a little breathing room, and then from the time I got out of the bathtub, I would take the kids for the rest of the night, and that became our rhythm during the week. And so I think it was the bathtub because it was the only room in the house that actually locked. So I don't think there was anything super spiritual about the bathroom except for none of the other rooms locked. And so I would do that. I'd go in, and we did that for years and years and years, probably 20 years. I sat in that bathtub. And I have 3 Bibles that from those days, and they're all, you know how steam affects your pages? Like all my underlinings kind of looks like women's mascara when the Holy Ghost comes. And the pages are kind of like, all. So one day I was in there just doing what I do. And by the way, it was never an exciting time. It was just it was actually more like relaxed than anything. And then I'd read my Bible and I'd pray. And I was doing that one day, about a year after my nervous breakdown, and the Lord walked through the wall. I've actually only had 2 encounters with the Lord in all my life where I actually saw him with my eyes, and this was like the first one. And he walked into the room, and you probably have heard this if you've heard any of my messages over the years, but the Lord walked into the room, and he began to talk to me about my divine destiny. And he stayed with me for a half an hour, so it wasn't a little quick thing. It was a long encounter. And he began to talk to me about my future. And he said, most of the things he said to me, I never share with anybody. And I didn't share this for years. But he said to me, "I've called you to be a prophet to the nations. And you are going to minister to mayors and prime ministers and kings and presidents, and you are going to you're going to bring the kingdom to governments, and you're going to shift the course of history towards the king and his kingdom till the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God." And he shared a whole bunch more with me, and I was stunned. Remember, I'm still in that place where I'm trying to figure out, I have no confidence in the Lord's telling me I'm going to prophet to nations, like a prophet to nations. And then he turns around to leave, and before he leaves, he turns back to me, and he walks over to me, and I will never forget this whole encounter. And he points right into my eyes, and I could see in his eyes the world. And he said to me, "And history will tell us if you believe me." That completely changed my theology. Because I don't know if I was taught this, but we taught prophecy back in those days. I wasn't the teacher at the time, and I was taught, if God prophesies something, then it will happen. If it doesn't come about, then it wasn't the word of the Lord. But here's the Lord himself standing in front of me and giving this huge prophetic word, half an hour long, and then he says, "History will tell us if you believe me." And when that one moment, probably the thing I grasped most is that I had to do something about what he just said to me. Because this was his prophetic destiny for me, but if I didn't agree with it, if I didn't get involved with it, then it wasn't going to happen. And I began to realize that there was lots of prophetic words throughout all of the Bible that didn't come to pass for some of the people. For instance, God prophesied to 1.5 million people that they were going to go from Egypt to the promised land. You know how many of those people that heard the prophecy actually went from Egypt to the promised land out of 1.5 million? 2, Joshua and Caleb. Everyone else died without the fulfillment of the prophecy. Not because the prophecy was bad, because they didn't do anything about it. Are you with me? It doesn't just take prophecy, it takes a prophetic culture to transform people.